are again. Welcome back to Bookmas. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than the previous Bookmas videos. So far we've been kind of wrapping up 2024, giving my favorite top fives of the year, top 5 fantasy, top 5 romance, top 5 cozy books. We've got an awesome bookish gift guide out right now. If you're still looking for gifts, go back and watch Bookmas Day 1. But today we are actually going to break down my top 10, maybe my bottom 10, my 10 least favorite books of 2024. The reason that I'm doing 10 is because going into it, I wanted to talk about the books that were less than 3 stars. So if I had rated a book 3 stars or above, it does not make this list, which out of the 60-ish some books that I've read this year so far, that is not a bad ratio. I'm pretty pleased with that. But there are specifically 10 books that I have rated less than 3 stars. I think the highest rated one is like 2.75 stars. So we're going to be breaking down all of those books and give the grand reveal of my least favorite book of the entire year so far. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about the plots of these books. I'm just going to give a very, very brief synopsis and why I didn't like the book and just chug right along as fast as we can to get through these 10 books in a timely fashion. So without further ado, let's get into it. Kicking off the list at our number 10th spot is Lucy Foley's The Guest List. I read this pretty early in January. I have really taken this year of 2024 to explore the mystery thriller genre a lot more than I usually have. I'm not a huge mystery thriller reader, but I'd like to be because I've read a couple of them that I absolutely love, and then I've read most other ones that I just don't like or I don't connect to as much. And this one kind of kicked off 2024 for me in a negative way. I did not like this book. It's kind of your classic Agatha Christie-esque novel where we've got a bunch of characters that go to a remote island to attend a wedding and somebody dies, and we are following like 5 or 6 main characters trying to figure out who the murderer is and what is their motive. There were a lot of things I didn't like about this book. I think the main thing for me was that every single character that we followed was a miserable person. They all hated their lives. They were sad, they were depressed, they were alcoholics, they were addicts. They just weren't fun to hang out with and spend time with as a reader. And we jumped through every single one of their perspectives. All we're doing this entire book is spending time with miserable people, which made me feel kind of miserable, and I didn't like that. Another thing with the hopping perspectives between so many different characters in such a short book, it felt like I never actually got to spend enough time with the characters to even give them a chance of me liking them. We moved around so fast between perspectives that it felt like I was being jerked around. I never really could get a grasp on each character's motives and their backstory because we didn't spend enough time with them, because naturally we had so many to get through. And then we also would have like narrator interjections as well. So the whole thing felt confusing, discombobulated, miserable people. I didn't love the writing style. And even within all of that, the mystery itself was pretty lackluster. The ending, when it was revealed who did it and why they did it, I just couldn't find a single reason to care at that point. I was so uninterested and checked out that even at the end, when I think it was supposed to be this big grand twist, it was more just like, well, that was a lot of coincidences that sort of added up to make what was supposed to be a big twist and reveal. But because there were a lot of other coincidences that happened throughout the rest of the book, I just kind of got fatigued by the whole thing and generally just disliked this book. Did not have a fun time. Would not recommend. That's what's kicking us off right now. Moving on to one of my most disappointing books of the year, Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I included the first book in this duology, Divine Rivals, in my top 5 favorite fantasy books of 2024. I loved the first book so much. I had really high expectations for the second book, and boy, did it let me down. I really won't go into a lot of plot on this one just because it is the finale in a series and continuation from the first book, so I feel like most anything that I can talk about in here would be a spoiler. But in the first book, we follow our 2 characters, Iris and Roman, who are journalists, and they're rivals in the beginning of the book, but through a series of letters that they write to each other and just various events that happen, they fall in love. And it's really beautiful, and I love the world that we're in. It's kind of an urban fantasy world with these divine gods that have been locked in a long-standing war with each other. I really, really liked the first book. I had such high expectations for the second book, and honestly, my biggest critique critique with this one is that it was just a mess. It was an absolute mess. The amount of plot holes that you could find in this book, or the amount of times that something would be randomly explained away. Like, there were questions in the first book that we were presented with that, as the reader, I'm expecting it to be answered in the second book, but it felt like Rebecca Ross kind of wrote herself into a corner, and then by the end of the second book, she's just trying to tie up all of these loose ends and these plot holes that she left for herself, and she was kind of in a little bit of a pickle, and then just started plucking random plot points and conclusions out of thin air to explain away something that she did in the first book, and it just didn't feel believable at all. It was, again, relying on coincidences to explain something that was maybe a really compelling question, and I wanted a lot more thought and care put into the answering of that question, and I just didn't get it. I didn't love the direction that our two main characters took, specifically with their relationship, at least in the first 2/3 of this book. I just overall was really disappointed in it. It still was wrapped up in a really beautiful writing style, and I still really did enjoy the world and the setting that we were in, but it just was so messy. Expectations aside, even if I had gone into this book very, very neutral, I still think I would have been bothered by a lot of these problems. So this one was a rough one for me and definitely deserves to be in my bottom 10 personally. Moving on to the next pick, The Atlas 6 by Olive E. Blake. I've talked about this one in some of my overhyped books, and I know a lot of people surprisingly feel the same way as I do about this. I was not expecting that. I thought that it would be a bit of a hot take for me to say that I didn't like this book, but I have found so many people that feel similarly to me, and it's made me feel really happy and less alone in my opinions. The Atlas 6 has honestly a very complicated plot that I'm not even sure how to condense into a couple sentences, but we follow a lot of characters. Once again, it's one of those books where you're shifting perspectives pretty often, which means that I have such a hard time connecting to any specific character because you're really just meeting them for the first time in this book, and you don't get to spend a ton of time with them because we're jumping around so much. So that was one of the issues that I had. But it's all these characters that kind of go to this academy competitive setting where they are trying to protect all of these artifacts in a secret society called the Alexandrian Society. There's magic involved. It's a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of science fiction, and story aside, because I actually think that the story could be interesting, but I felt like I was wading through mud on this one because Olive E. Blake's writing style is so obnoxious to me. She kind of falls into that hole of being a really, really pretentious writer. She uses lyrical, flowery, hypothetical, ethereal writing style and sentence structure where she can say, literally write out so many words and say absolutely nothing in a sentence. It's just confusing, but I feel like it was written from a place of trying to be cool. What's the word here? What's the word I'm looking for? I'm not even sure. It just didn't feel effective to me. It felt like she was writing sentences just for the sake of maybe making the reader pause and consider something and trying to have these hard-hitting lines that really get to the crux of an important point and perspective that she's trying to share, but really she just was saying nothing. I skimmed the end of this. I couldn't take it anymore. I was so annoyed with the story and the characters, but mainly the writing style. It just was not for me. I'm sorry. It's not for me. Next we have The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This was definitely one that I've talked about before. It's going to fall into a similar boat as some of the other books. One of the main reasons why I really didn't like this one is because of the writing style. It's hard for me to critique a plot like this one because it is kind of just a silly romance plot, and I'm all for a silly romance plot. They really do have their time and place for me. I want it to be cheesy. I want it to be over the top and hyperbolic, but the writing style in this was just, once again, very obnoxious in a different way to Olive E. Blake, but obnoxious enough where it hindered me being able to enjoy the romance at all and the plot line at all. It follows our two main characters that I don't remember their names, honestly, Anna and West. It follows our two main characters, Anna and West. They live in student family housing at their college together. They get fake married because they want to get cheap rent in student family housing. West tells Anna Anna that he will get the marriage annulled after he graduates in a year. They live together for a year in this housing, legally married, but they never speak to each other. They hardly ever see each other. They have zero relationship at all. After the year is up, West graduates, or maybe both of them graduate. One of them graduates. West moves out and says that he's going to annul the marriage for Anna. He does not annul the marriage, which, first of all, giant red flag. He doesn't annul the marriage because he comes from a super rich family and there's a clause in all of the children's trust funds that they have to be married for 5 years, a minimum of 5 years, in order to have access to their trust funds. Oh, bye, fire. West is like, I have no other relationship prospects on the horizon. I have no idea when I would actually be married, let alone for 5 years. There's nobody in the world that could put up with my crazy rich family that is semi-psychotic and horrible. And so he's like, you know what? I'm just gonna not get the marriage annulled because I'm going to run out this trust fund timeline so that I can get access to my money. And also I'm not gonna tell Anna about it because what could go wrong? Fast forward 5 years. Yes, at this point they are nearly married 5 years. And West's little sister is getting married on this tropical island, and everybody wants to meet West's wife because he's told them that he's married, but he just doesn't want to hang around his family and doesn't want to introduce his wife to his family. So everybody thinks he's married. They expect his wife to show up to his little sister's wedding, so he has to then go and find Anna and convince her to come on this island vacation wedding thing in order to prove to everybody that they're married. So we've got a fake dating, fake marriage trope in this plot line. Anna very readily agrees because West says that he will pay her to come, the foundations of a beautiful relationship, and she really needs the money because her dad is going through chemotherapy and is going to die if she doesn't get money to pay for his treatment. So obviously they go to this island and everything is fine and happy and they fall in love and live happily ever after. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in between there. But all that to say, it's an insane plot line, and I can always get behind an insane plot line in a romance book because they just know what they are. They know that they're not trying to be anything other than an insane romance book, and I can respect that. But in this case, the writing style that these authors, because it's actually 2 authors and Christina Lauren is a pen name. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I didn't like it, is because the writing just felt very disjointed, very discombobulating. The only way that I can describe the writing style of this book is that it felt like I was reading somebody's blog. It's first person perspective, and there would be times where Anna, our main character, is having a thought process. There's literally brackets and parentheses of like weird interjections like LOL, things that I think are supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, clever, funny, and witty, but they're actually not. It actually really pulled me out of the story itself, and it felt like I was reading a caption of a photo on Instagram or, again, somebody's blog, and I just didn't like it. And I think these authors were trying to do something new and maybe a little bit out of the box, but to me it was extremely distracting and not effective in the slightest. So that, coupled with the insane plotline, just made me really, really not enjoy this book. So the next book on this list is one that I read on Kindle. I don't actually have the physical copy, and that is A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. This is Ashley Poston's most recent book that she released after The 7-Year Slip, and The 7-Year Slip, I'm sure you're all familiar with. That book absolutely blew up on the internet and booktok and bookstagram. People freaking love this book. I myself enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I think I gave it a 4-star. I was really disappointed in it just because my expectations were so high based on what everybody was saying about it. So when it was said that A Novel Love Story was coming out by Ashley Poston, I was excited to read a book by her with maybe more managed expectations and see kind of where it landed on the scale. So A Novel Love Story is about our main character who is obsessed with a certain book series, and it's like a romance book series. It's kind of a small town romance book series. She's obsessed with it. She's read all of the books, and one day she is driving and gets magically stuck in the town that all of these romance books take place in, and she can't leave the town. And so she meets all of the characters that she's loved for forever from these books. I think that that was a really good plot premise and kind of hook. I really was hooked. I was into it. I was excited to see where the story would go, and it just was really boring, really lackluster. All of the characters, including our main character, fell so flat. They were so dull and two-dimensional. There's just nothing really to write home about in this book, whereas The 7-Year Slip, I actually think that there were some really good moments in it. There was really beautiful writing at some times and emotional moments with the characters, and I felt pretty connected to them, and it was believable what they were going through. In a novel love story, it was extremely forgettable. Again, there was just nothing really of note. I thought that the romance was completely unbelievable. There was no chemistry between these two characters, and kind of the ending, the way that the whole thing wrapped up, I won't say much to not give spoilers. Again, it just kind of fell back onto coincidences, and everything just is wrapping up nicely because of course it can, and nothing was actually explained. It just was kind of rushed over, and we're just supposed to believe what the author is telling us, but we never actually experienced it as the reader. We never felt it as the reader. We were just being told how we were supposed to feel without really feeling it ourselves. That's kind of the best way that I can describe it. So that one I was definitely pretty disappointed with. So moving on to this next one. It's called The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. This was a book of the month pick, and I picked this book because I just wanted a quick romance. I just wanted a cheesy romance. I wanted something to cleanse my palate. I think I had read a couple pretty dense and heavy fantasy books before this, and I just needed a breather to lift myself out of that hole of dense fantasy world building. So this was a book of the month pick that I ended up going with, and it follows our main character, Delphi, who at the very beginning of the book dies. And she is instantly transported to essentially the afterlife, where she talks with somebody there about how she's dead. While she's in the afterlife, another dead person shows up, and she instantly falls in love with this dead person, realizes that he's not actually dead. He's just under anesthesia at a dentist's appointment. But I guess sometimes when you're under anesthesia, you can just like show up in the afterlife just to say like a quick hello. So Delphi meets this guy that's at his dentist appointment, but then obviously he starts to wake up and go back to Earth, and Delphi's like, oh my gosh, that was the literal love of my life, and I'm dead, and now what am I supposed to do? And the person that she's talking to in the afterlife is like, well, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'll send you back down to Earth, but you have a certain amount of time, I think it's like a week or 10 days or something, to find this mystery man and kiss him. And if you do that, you don't have to die and you can live your life. And Delphi's like, great, I'm gonna do that. So she goes back down to Earth, and she has 10 days to find this mystery person in a literal sea of millions and millions of people to kiss him so that she doesn't die again. And I thought that that was actually a pretty interesting premise when I first picked up the book, but as I was reading it, I just kind of think that the way that the author wrote the main character was a little bit offensive to me. She wrote our main character Delphi as very airheaded, very ditzy, but kind of in a way that was, again, it just felt like a bit derogatory towards women in general, which I had never experienced a book, especially a romance book like this that was written by a female author, doing that. A more specific example is that Delphi is supposed to be a UK size 12 in her clothes, which is like a US size 8, an extremely average size, the most average size in America, and I'm assuming similarly to the UK, but her weight was brought up in this book an uncomfortable amount of time in ways that, again, just didn't really feel right to me. Delphi was very, very negative about her own body because it's first person perspective, so everything negative we're hearing about Delphi is actually coming from herself. She's talking about how big her thighs are, how overweight she is. There'd be characters that would make completely unnecessary comments about Delphi's weight, like one of the girls is loaning her a dress and the character makes a comment like, this was before I lost a bunch of weight, so it should fit you. And I'm reading it and I'm like, why? Why is that necessary to bring up right now? It doesn't actually drive the plot, and it doesn't add any character development for Delphi herself. I think that maybe the author was trying to throw body positivity in this book, which I think is really important and really needed, but the way that she was doing it felt like tokenism. Like the author was saying, hey, look at me, I have a UK size 12 as the main character in my book, but it felt really, really weird and made me uncomfortable reading it, and I didn't like it. And aside from all of that stuff about women, the other characters just kind of sucked, and the storyline itself just kind of sucked. And again, I feel like a bunch of twists were thrown in at the end to kind of like catch the reader's attention again, but it just felt like a coincidence. Felt like everything was phoned in a big old cop-out. And man, didn't enjoy this one, not at all. So there you go. Moving right along. What You Gonna Do by Avery Flynn. I picked this one up because I just wanted a romantic, witchy October read. I was in the middle of all of my fall reading and I just felt like I wanted that kind of cute Hallmark movie type book, but instead of for Christmas, for fall and autumn and October. And I don't know where I even got this book, but it's been on my shelf for years and it's short and it was quick and I was like, hey, why the heck not? Let's do it. And yeah, it was fine. It was not great. I think I rated it 2 stars. The characters were weird. It follows a witchy family, one of the most powerful witch families in this setting. But the main girl, Tilda, that belongs to this family, doesn't have any powers, seemingly, which is making her feel like an embarrassment to her family. This guy, Gil, has the power to manipulate people's emotions, which he uses against Tilda multiple times, which I did not like. And also felt like a very large red flag as far as a romantic relationship goes. Yeah, didn't really buy that, didn't love that. Tilda accidentally freezes her entire family and then has to figure out how to unfreeze them as a witch that has no powers. And that's kind of the plot line of it. I really don't have much to say about it. It was just meh. Okay, the next book that I rated lower than 3 stars was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a difficult one for me to talk about because 1, it was such a confusing plot that I don't remember what happened, but 2, I think a lot of people think about this book as being really good, and Susanna Clarke is very well respected as a writer and her books are kind of held in pretty high esteem from what I can tell, but this book to me, I just don't think I'm the right audience. I think that most of the writing just felt like one big metaphor to me, and it really took me over half of the book to even semi-understand what was going on. I didn't really care about the story at all because, frankly, I couldn't understand the story, and I think maybe this is speaking more to me as a reader rather than the book itself, because I know people love this book. I know they do. And maybe if I was in a different mood going into it, I wasn't ready to read something this, I don't even know if deep is the right word for it. It just, like I said, everything felt like a metaphor. I feel like this author didn't describe anything specific to the reader. She just kind of described emotions and feelings, which there were some really cool ways that she used that in her writing style, but for the most part, I just felt really lost and confused. And for that reason, I had to rate it pretty lowly. But it was a short book, and that is the positive thing that I can say about it. Even though it was really difficult for me to get through, I at least was able to get through it semi-quickly because it was so short, and that did motivate me to actually get through it. I think I probably would have DNF'd this book if it was any longer. It's under 250 pages, and because of that, I just kind of resolved with myself, I'm gonna finish this book. I can finish this book. I can read anything that's under 250 pages. Like, it's okay. And so I did finish it, but if it was any longer, this would have been a DNF, unfortunately, and I'm really sorry if there are people out there that think this is a beautiful work of art. I think it might be a beautiful work of art, but it's just not the type of art that I enjoy consuming. Okay, we're getting down to it. Next, we've got Severance by Ling Ma. This book, the reason that I didn't like it was mostly because it just made me feel a lot of negative emotions. It follows our main character in kind of a post-apocalyptic setting. We get present-ish tense with our character, Candace, and we also get a couple years in the past. The story is unfolding that there is an infection that is happening in America and presumably the world, and if you get this infection, I think you turn into a zombie, and it basically can't be stopped, and it caused everybody to wear masks and have to work from home and go home, and it kind of hit a little bit too close. And this was written, I believe, in 2018, and as I was reading it, I just felt extremely unsettled and not great about the whole thing, and I think that that caused me to miss a lot of what the author was actually intending the book to convey. It's a Chinese author about a Chinese main character, and there's a lot of cultural stuff in it that I think is really important to talk about, and I think the author probably put her heart and soul into this, but I personally just felt that like icky feeling in my chest while reading it, and I don't know why I didn't DNF this one either, because I really just felt bad about reading it. But I think similarly to Piranesi, it was a short book, and this has been on my shelf for so long, and when a book has been sitting there in the TBR graveyard for such a long time, I get frustrated and I just have almost like an itch that I need to scratch. Like, I have to finish this book. I have to get this off of my TBR because I want to say that I've read it. I want to be able to move it to the read pile. And that was mainly my motivation for finishing this book. But in all honesty, I kind of wish that I didn't, because it didn't make me feel great afterwards. It put me into such a deep reading slump afterwards. The only thing that I wanted to read was really simple, cheesy, romance, lighthearted things to lift me out of such a dark place. I just didn't love it that much. But I think that there is content in this book that people would really like, especially if you like the post-apocalyptic setting and kind of a more dystopian setting. And if you can relate to some of the cultural stuff that this author talks about, I think that people would really love this book. But for me, it just kind of didn't make me feel good. So that one's pretty low on my list as the least favorite ones. But I'm sure you're all expecting it. My least favorite book of 2024, the only 1-star book that I have had all year, is Pumpkin Spice and Everything Nice. And before you come at me for buying this freaking book, let me tell you why I bought it. It's because I went to multiple bookstores in September and October, in different cities even. And for whatever reason, this book was front and center in every single one of them. Literally, I walk into Barnes & Noble and this book is on the first table in new fiction, not even new romance, in new fiction. But if you were to go to the new romance table, it'd be there too. It'd be right next to The 7-Year Slip and Emily Henry books and all of these romance books that people generally speak very positively about. This would be right there next to it. And I picked this book up 3 separate times, read the back synopsis, and then put it back down because I decided I didn't want to read it. And on the 4th time, I was like, okay, well, this book is everywhere. They are really putting a lot of marketing behind this. I probably should just see what it's about. It follows our main character, Lucy, in a beautiful, picturesque town, similarly to Stars Hollow and Gilmore Girls. And the reason that I compare it to Stars Hollow and Gilmore Girls is because the author literally compared it to Stars Hollow and Gilmore Girls, rather than describing the town and giving the feelings to me just through words. She was like, we live in a town that's similar to Stars Hollow and Gilmore Girls. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's this kind of book. It was just a lot of that, a lot of telling, not showing. There were no emotional beats in this book. I didn't realize it from the front of the book, but this follows 2 sophomores in high school, so they're like 15 years old, and their parents have rival coffee shops, and I don't know what else to say about it. This specifically was like something you would find from a 13-year-old on Wattpad, and that's a really strong sentence for me to say, because I was probably that 13-year-old on Wattpad many years ago, which is why I'm saying it. I literally was like, oh gosh, as a little preteen me, I feel like this is something that I would try to write. It was so rough, and I mostly finished it just from morbid curiosity and nothing else. But I think the thing that really grinds my gears the most about this is, how did they market this so that it was so front and center in so many different bookstores, at least that I saw? Somebody's got a lot of money that they put behind the marketing in this book, and I don't really get it, but that is why I picked it up. I feel like I got hoodwinked with this book, and this is my 1-star review book. It is the worst book that I've read in 2024, and that's that. So, here are my 10 least favorite books that I've read in 2024. I would love to hear your thoughts on some of them if you've read them, or what books were really disappointing to you so far this year. What are some of your least favorite books? Let's have a conversation about it in the comments. As always, thank you so much for joining and watching and hanging out with me here on the internet, and we will see you very soon for more Bookmas content.